Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality. And we are back. It's time for another Good Vibes. I'm Martin Foss along with Debbie Cox DeNova. She's in the house. How you doing, Debbie?
I'm doing well. How are you?
All right, we had a good topic last week. I'm looking at the topic this week, overcoming parenting mistakes. Mm-hmm. My parents didn't make any mistakes. They were perfect.
Oh my gosh, the one and only.
They had 6 of them.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure we were a challenge, and just like every family.
Yeah, and I think, and by the way, if anyone at home is not a parent, know that this information is applicable to any meaningful relationship that you have. So think about maybe a rupture that has happened recently with somebody or in the past with somebody that you care about, because it's the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. And we have spent time talking about in romantic relationships, rupture and repair. This is a conversation about rupture and repair with your children. And it's a very important conversation because parenting really is the most important job that we have. And we don't get a manual for it. So I know personally, I talk to a lot of people, a lot of clients who are in major self-beat up because they misstepped multiple times with their children. This information comes from Dr. Becky Kennedy, and she's been called by Time Magazine the Millennial Parenting Whisperer. So if you want more information about her, she's
I actually have friends who have not spoken to their fathers or their mothers, and I can't fathom that.
Yeah.
But maybe this will help.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully it will, and hopefully it will help parents who are actively in the parenting game right now, which never ends, even as adults, but especially if your children are still at home, it will help you to correct mistakes of the past. And just to open, I want to talk about years ago when I was homeschooling my kids, and I took them home from a day of just complete activity. I was exhausted, but I had promised them that we were going to make a dessert together, and so we were in the kitchen. I reminded one of my children to be careful because she tends to drop things. And I said, just make sure you're being careful with that. And before I knew it, turned around for just a second, and almond milk was spilled all over the floor underneath the fridge, like literally just splattered across the floor. And I found myself going, I told you, in a yelling voice, to be careful, right? Screaming. She got shocked like this. She started crying. She left the kitchen upset. And I found myself as a parent in self-beat up going, well, that is not exactly what I wanted to do, but it was a visceral reaction. Now, Dr. Becky Kennedy says she's been doing this work for a long time, a clinical psychologist that is focused on helping parents to parent well. And she says all parents yell, and after they yell, all parents don't know what to do. Right. So this is a conversation about what to do when you have misstepped with your children, because what's really particularly interesting about children is that they will take the talk, the words that their parents use with them, especially in emotionally charged situations, it will become their self-talk throughout their life. And so it's very important that when we misstep, that we actually repair that. It's not too late. It's never too late. She actually uses an example, even as adults, to imagine, especially if you have a strained relationship with your parent, that you all of a sudden get a call out of the blue where they actually work to make amends with the tools that we're about to talk about, or you find a letter that they wrote to you. And she said, without fail, people have a visceral reaction, no matter how old they are, whether their parents are still alive or they're not. They have a visceral reaction to the idea of their parent apologizing and making amends for past mistakes. So she said, at any age, you have the ability to help reframe this, because our memories of what happened are composed not only of the actual event, but every single time we remember it afterward. So when you're able to remember it from a safe context, you actually start to change the past for yourself. It's a healing process.
My dad, when he was dying, he said, if I ever did anything to upset you or hurt you, I apologize.
Yeah.
And I said, Dad, no need to apologize. You needed to keep me alive.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love that, and that's one of the things that she said it has been said too, is that parenting is the one job that you really do care about from your deathbed, right? When you look back, how did I parent? How did I do it? So him making amends with you or attempting to correct any mistakes that may have been
Something
made.
he thought was a flaw, and I thought was the grace that God gave me a dad that cared what I was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. So the thing about it is to get really good with repair process, okay? And really, when we're talking about repair, what we're talking about is going back to the moment that the mistake was made, right? And to take responsibility and then acknowledge that the impact that it might have had on the person. Again, remembering you can apply this to any meaningful relationship. So in the repair process, that is what we're doing. This is very different from just apologizing, because apologizing typically sounds like, listen, I'm sorry I yelled at you. Can we please move on, right? And so what that is like, can we sweep this under the rug, where what we're doing here is actually acknowledging the rupture. And if you want to be the type of person who gets really good at repair, it's important to remember that you need rupture. So if you've made a mistake, just consider it practice in getting good at repair. Step one is done. You need to have the rupture.
But in every crack, there's got to be a sealer.
Yes. Yes. Or otherwise the relationship corrodes, right? The quality of the relationship corrodes. Okay. So the first part is to understand what will happen if you don't do that. Children have a coping mechanism of self-blame when you don't correct. So if my daughter ran to her room and I never corrected that, she would resort to the only coping mechanism that she has, which is self-blame. And children who grow up to be the type of adult, and self-blame sounds like something's wrong with me, I cause bad things to happen, I'm no good, that kind of thing. And so children will grow up to be adults who have this self-talk that developed as a child, and it makes them more vulnerable to stress, anxiety, depression, and just feelings of low self-worth as an adult. And then they're in therapy trying to work that out. Okay, so that's what happens if you don't do anything about it.
All right, let's continue this. This is a good topic, and a lot of people, might be time at the end of the show to pick up the phone and call somebody you love and make up. We'll be right back. Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough. All right, if you haven't picked up that phone yet, you need to pick up the phone. Call somebody you love who you've been fighting with. Make up, heal it. All right, this is a great topic. Overcoming parenting mistakes.
Yeah, so before we went to break, was talking about how if you don't actually do the repair process, what children will often do is that they'll use the coping mechanism of self-blame in order to, and Dr. Becky says that Ronald Fairbairn put it best when he said that it's better for kids to be a sinner in a world ruled by God than to live in a world ruled by the devil. And what that means is that it's actually adaptive for a child to believe and internalize badness within himself. And at least in that way, he can still believe in the goodness of the world around him and his parents, right? Versus believing that his parents and the world is bad. And that's a much scarier thought. So it's an adaptive behavior to self-blame. So what they do is they actually start thinking like, what's wrong with me? If no one's there to help them sort of process that differently, they grow up to be adults who also, in every instance, especially when there's an emotionally charged instance where they've made a mistake, where they're thinking something's wrong with me. I'm this type of person.
Oh my God, if you think your parents are the devil, you don't have a chance.
Right. And unfortunately, a lot of people are left in that loop of believing that either the world is bad, right? So it's like what happens in our childhood is very, very important. So how do we go back into the repair process? What we need to do is acknowledge, go back to the point where we made a mistake and create a safe, connected conversation. And this needs to be separate from the correction. So there was a conversation that needed to happen about being careful in the kitchen. But that is not something that we need to connect to the part where I address my yelling, right? So a lot of parents will do this thing like, I'm sorry, I yelled yelled at you, but if you hadn't spilled the milk, this wouldn't have happened.
Well, how about, let me tell you why I got upset.
Right, exactly, which connects and insinuates that the child's behavior is a cause for your reaction, which is not the actual truth. We should be as responsible as parents for our own behavior, right? And it also leads to modeling a sort of apology that is not a genuine apology at all. So there's a time to correct the behavior that happened in the kitchen, but it needs to be separate from actually making a repair to the rupture when your own behavior is out of alignment.
Or I had a sucky day at work. And you just happen to drop the milk at the wrong time.
Right, exactly. So whatever you do, you definitely don't want to insinuate blame on the child for your own adult behavior, okay? So step one is to repair with yourself. And repairing with yourself is very important because if you're not coming from a rooted, connected place yourself, it's hard for you to convey that to your child. What that means is that you need to separate your identity, who I am, from the behavior, what I did. And a lot of times what people do is they'll collapse these two for themselves and for their children. Dr. Becky says that, people have a wish, like a wish underneath that, or a hope that their child will actually help heal them. And instead, our children come and they trigger us. And this is actually something that can cause us to pass down traumas, what we call ancestral curses, right? From the way we were parented to our children. So we need to make sure that we are coming from a place of understanding, I am a good parent who was having a hard time, right? So this is who I am. This is the behavior. When you come this way for yourself, then you're ready for step two, which is to repair with your child. And repairing with your child can be as simple as 3 steps. You're going to acknowledge what happened. You're going to name what happened. You're going to take responsibility for your part in it. And then you're going to name what you would do differently in the future. So it can be a very easy conversation. Like, look, I just keep thinking about what happened in the kitchen. I just want to let you know that I'm sorry I yelled at you. That was probably very scary, and it's not your fault.
Can't that be a laughing moment too?
Of course, yeah.
So if somebody drops the almond milk and you got 3 kids around, you instead of blowing up, just going, okay, make it fun.
Yeah, and that's what we as parents hope that will happen, right? Like in the very best case scenario. So this is where this is what you want, but this is how you actually show up, which is normal because we're all human beings, right? So if you have a commitment to be the kind of parent who laughs things off, and that certainly was my commitment, but you're having a hard day, you're exhausted, you are at wit's end, and you find yourself misbehaving in a way, this is a way to go back and actually reframe it for your child so that now you've given them a completely different context. Instead of self-blame, like what's wrong with me, I make bad things happen, they're actually seeing that you're taking responsibility and you're showing them how to clean up their own mistakes in the future with other people, right?
They don't say you're clumsy just like your father.
Exactly. But it's really, really important to remember that that a real true repair is not just an apology where you're kind of suggesting, every single time you spill something in the kitchen, it makes me upset. I might yell at you, right? That's not an actual apology. It's still an insinuation. It still underscores that idea that it's about you. You're a cause here. There's something wrong with you. And if you would get it right, then you're not allowed to make mistakes.
And if you don't fix it, they're going to keep dropping because they're going to be scared every time they pick up the milk.
Yeah. And so here's the thing is that you would think that as adults, we grow up and we look at it and we're like, oh, I can see now that mom was just, she was having a hard time. But that's not what happens. What typically happens is even though you're very mature and you've got all these things going on, when you make a mistake, if you are patterned to self-beat up because your parents beat you up in that moment, you will take over and revert back to that childhood expression. So no matter how old you are, if you're old, Dr. Becky says you're older than your kids. So if you're able to reach out to your kids even now, it can be very healing to even place a phone call and say, I'm thinking about your childhood. There were a lot of moments that were probably uncomfortable for you, and reasonably so. And I just want you to know that I apologize. I was very stressed out during that time. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here to listen, not for rebuttals, but just so that we can actually heal. That can be an extremely healing process for your kids, even
Good
as adults.
vibes. We'll see you next week.
Rouse's Markets is voted Best Grocery Store in New Orleans, Best Grocery Store in Baton Rouge, Mississippi, Gulf Coast, Thibodaux, Houma, Hammond, Lake Charles, Mobile, year after year. Thank you for choosing us Best Grocery Store on the Gulf Coast. Number one. Thank you.
Thank you.
The number one grocery store.
In Mississippi, Alabama,
Louisiana. 1 million customers a week can't be wrong. Welcome to Rouse's.